There is a war that shapes every life, yet almost no one sees it. It does not roar on battlefields, it does not echo through cities, and it does not leave marks on the skin. This war unfolds in the smallest, quietest moment a human being can experience. The moment between what happens to you and how you decide to respond. In that single breath, your destiny is written or rewritten. Every victory you have ever achieved, every collapse you have ever suffered, has been born in that invisible space. The Stoics understood this long before modern science gave the phenomenon a name. They called it the ruling faculty, the inner command center from which all choices emerge. Neuroscience now confirms what Marcus Aurelius intuited in the dark silence of his tent. Between stimulus and response lies the prefrontal cortex, the place where discipline is born. The mind anticipates consequences, evaluates emotions, and issues orders faster than the world can react. This is where your future is forged. Yet most people never enter this space consciously. They let impulses carry them. They let fear decide. They let anger speak. They let desire guide their hand. They live as if emotions are commands rather than signals, and in doing so, they surrender their lives to forces that were supposed to be managed, not obeyed. This is the war no one sees, a war between the part of you that wants to rise and the part that wants relief, a war between your highest potential and your most primitive impulses. A war between the self you are and the self you could become. The real question is not whether you are fighting this war. You already are. The question is whether you are aware that the war is happening, because the moment you become aware, everything changes. Awareness is the first weapon, discipline is the second. Together they turn a fragile mind into an unshakable one. Every human life is shaped not by what happens in the world, but by what it does with its emotions. This is the threshold we now step into, to understand the inner empire you were meant to rule and the forces determined to overthrow it. The inner empire. Why discipline determines everything. Every person carries within them an empire that cannot be conquered from the outside. It is an empire built not of stone or territory, but of attention, intention, and the quiet sovereignty of the mind. The Stoics called its central throne the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. It is the part of you that decides what you follow, what you resist, and what you ultimately become. And whether you realize it or not, this inner empire is always under construction or collapse. Modern neuroscience mirrors this idea with striking precision. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making and self-control, acts as the biological throne of discipline. It is here that impulses are evaluated, desires redirected, and long-term goals protected from the urgency of emotion. When Andrew Huberman describes how dopamine shapes behavior, how anticipation, not reward, creates direction, he is describing the same mechanics Marcus Aurelius sensed when he wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. Discipline is not a heroic act reserved for exceptional days. It is the quiet architecture of your identity. What you repeat becomes what you believe becomes what you expect, and what you expect becomes the life you live. This is why Seneca warned that he who is a slave to his impulses, even if he sits on a throne, is not free. If your attention is scattered, you become scattered. If your habits are weak, you become weak. If your mind is trained, you become unshakable. Neuroscience tells us that repeated choices carve physical pathways in the brain. Habit circuits strengthen like muscles. Attention loops form feedback systems that define how you perceive the world. Your brain is constantly asking a simple question: what should we prioritize? Whatever you choose to obey becomes the answer. If you obey fear, fear becomes your teacher. If you obey distraction, distraction becomes your destiny. But if you obey discipline, discipline becomes your identity. This is the foundation of the inner empire. Not rigid control, but conscious authorship. The understanding that nothing shapes a life more than what the mind consistently returns to. The Stoics trained this daily because they knew that life does not wait. Every moment is an invitation to take the throne or abandon it. Yet if discipline is the throne, then something else is always trying to overthrow it. Something quieter, older, and far more cunning. The forces within you that whisper, push, and demand to take command before thought has a chance to speak. The tyranny of emotion. How untrained feelings control the mind. Long before a thought forms, something else moves. A flash in the chest, a tightening of the jaw, a surge beneath the ribs. Emotion arrives without asking permission, and for most people, it becomes the author of their actions. What should have been a signal becomes a command. What should have been a messenger becomes a ruler. This is the tyranny of emotion. Subtle, persistent, and often invisible until the damage is done. The Stoics warned of this with the concept of pathos, the destructive passions that distort perception. They described emotions as waves that rise suddenly and attempt to pull the mind into chaos. Modern psychology gives this phenomenon a scientific name, amygdala hijack. Daniel Goleman explains that when the emotional brain activates, it overrides the rational one, often in less than a second. The prefrontal cortex goes silent and instinct takes the throne. Fear convinces you that danger is everywhere, even when the room is safe. Anger tells you that the problem is always someone else, even when the pattern is your own. Anxiety invents futures that never arrive. Desire promises fulfillment but rarely delivers. These forces reshape your reality before reason even has time to breathe. Jordan Peterson notes that chaos emerges when emotion is unregulated because emotion magnifies everything it touches. A small inconvenience becomes an insult. A single doubt becomes a catastrophe. A moment of tension becomes a story of failure. The tragedy is not that emotion exists. Emotion is human. The tragedy is that most people never learn to train it. They let their oldest, most primitive impulses decide the quality of their lives. They confuse feeling with truth. They mistake immediacy for importance. They respond to the world through the raw lens of fear, anger, craving, and worry. And in doing so, they abandon the very freedom the Stoics fought to preserve, the freedom to choose their interpretation. Untrained emotions distort perception like fog on a glass. They make you misread intentions, misjudge situations, and mistrust yourself. Neuroscience shows that emotional surges narrow attention, suppress logic, and activate survival circuits. This is why a person can know what to do, want to do it, and still fail to act. Emotion seizes the wheel before discipline even enters the room. But recognizing this tyranny is the first step toward dismantling it. If emotion tries to rule the inner empire, something else must rise to counter it. Not suppression, not denial, but mastery. If emotion is the tyrant, then discipline must become the general. The alchemy of control, turning impulse into intention. There is a moment, brief, fragile, and easily missed, in which impulse can be reshaped into intention. This moment is the true arena of self-mastery. The Stoics called it prohairesis, the disciplined ability to choose one's stance before the world dictates it. It is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to meet emotion with awareness, strong enough to redirect it. Modern science describes the same battlefield through two mechanisms: neuroplasticity and the thought-emotion-behavior loop of cognitive behavioral therapy. When an emotional surge rises, the brain activates patterns wired by past experiences. But these patterns are not destiny. Joe Dispenza explains that the brain rewires through conscious interruption by inserting new awareness in the exact moment an old impulse tries to take control. In that interruption, identity begins to shift. This is the alchemy of control. You do not kill the impulse, you convert its energy. Anger becomes clarity when you slow the breath and widen attention. Fear becomes preparedness when you observe it instead of becoming it. Desire becomes discipline when you delay gratification long enough to regain command. This is not suppression. Suppression traps emotion inside. Transmutation turns emotion into fuel for higher action. Science supports this transformation. A controlled breath activates the prefrontal cortex and weakens the amygdala's grip. Attention redirection moves neural energy away from panic circuits toward deliberate thinking. Narrative reframing rewires the brain's interpretation of events, altering emotional chemistry at the source. Each of these actions is a small vote for the person you want to become instead of the person your impulses try to create. This is why Epictetus taught that external events do not disturb us. It is our judgments that disturb us, and those judgments can be trained. When you pause before reacting, you are not delaying life. You are reclaiming it. You are stepping into the gap where discipline is born. With every repetition, the brain learns that intention, not impulse, is the rightful ruler of the inner empire. The process is simple but not easy. It demands presence. It demands repetition. It demands the courage to witness your own mind without flinching. But the reward is profound. The feeling that you are no longer being dragged by your emotions, but are steering them toward a direction you chose. Yet even this alchemy requires practice, and practice requires structure. Mastery is not forged in moments of crisis, but in the consistency of daily training. The battlefield now shifts to where habits are born and identities are shaped. The doctrine of daily war. Whichever habit wins rules the kingdom. A disciplined life is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in the repetition that happens when no one is watching. The Stoics understood this with unwavering clarity. They trained their minds the way soldiers train their bodies, systematically, deliberately, and with the knowledge that the greatest battles would not announce themselves before arriving. Marcus Aurelius rehearsed loss, hardship, and temptation in his journal, so that when life tested him, his mind would not collapse under surprise. Epictetus taught students to confront discomfort so they could develop the strength to choose their response, instead of being consumed by it. Modern neuroscience presents the same truth through the mechanics of habit loops. Every behavior follows a cycle: cue, routine, reward. Each repetition strengthens neural circuits, carving grooves in the brain that shape identity. Habits are not small actions. They are the architecture of the self. If you train distraction, you become unfocused. If you train avoidance, you become afraid. If you train consistency, you become dependable. And if you train discipline, you become powerful. Andrew Huberman explains that friction followed by focus creates neurochemical imprinting. In simple terms, the harder it is to start and the more you persist, the more deeply the brain wires the habit. This is why the early moments of practice matter so much. When you act despite resistance, you signal to your brain that the behavior is meaningful, and dopamine marks the circuit for reinforcement. The struggle itself becomes the teacher. Musonius Rufus, often forgotten among Stoic giants, declared discipline not as restriction, but as liberation. When you build strong habits, you are no longer a prisoner of impulse. You no longer negotiate with laziness, doubt, or emotional storms. You rise automatically to the level of your training. Promises fade under pressure. Habits endure. Daily war is not dramatic. It is quietly relentless. It happens in the decision to get up when comfort invites you back to sleep. In the choice to work when distraction feels easier. In the discipline to breathe before reacting. In the courage to stay silent when anger wants to explode. Every one of these moments is a battle won or lost. Over time, the sum of these battles becomes your character. Discipline is not poetic. It is practical. It is not mystical. It is measurable. It is the accumulation of choices that no one applauds, but that all results depend on. When you understand this, you stop hoping for strength and begin building it. And as these habits solidify, something unexpected begins to happen. The storms inside you start to lose their force. The emotional weather shifts, and you begin to sense a stillness rising beneath the noise. The journey now moves inward, toward the mastery of that stillness. Becoming the stillness. Mastering the emotional weather. There comes a point in disciplined practice where something subtle yet profound begins to emerge. The storms do not disappear, but they lose their power to throw you off course. Fear still whispers, but it no longer dictates your choices. Anger still rises, but it no longer blinds your judgment. Desire still tempts, but it no longer chains your attention. You begin to sense a quiet authority growing within you, a steadiness that no circumstance can steal. The Stoics called this state apatheia, not indifference, but lucidity, a mind unclouded by emotional turbulence, a perception that sees events clearly rather than through the distortion of uncontrolled reaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind can preserve its tranquility even when the body or the world is shaken. Modern neuroscience reveals why. When you train the mind to regulate itself, the vagus nerve strengthens its influence on the body, slowing heart rate, softening stress responses, and expanding awareness. Interoception, the brain's ability to sense internal states, becomes sharper. You no longer drown in what you feel, you witness it with calm precision. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence echoes this Stoic understanding. A regulated mind can observe its own emotional weather without collapsing into it. Instead of being pulled by the winds of anxiety or pushed by the heat of anger, you become the one who stands at the center. Stillness becomes your anchor, and from this anchor, an extraordinary clarity arises. You discern which thoughts are true, which impulses are manipulations, which emotions are temporary, and which actions align with your values. This stillness is not passive. It is an active stance, a trained readiness. It is the space where you gain authority over your reactions. It is where fear becomes information rather than paralysis, where discomfort becomes challenge rather than threat, where the mind moves from survival to sovereignty. As you cultivate this inner stability, the world stops feeling like a series of emergencies. It becomes a landscape to navigate rather than a storm to endure. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the world is only opinion. Neuroscience confirms that emotion is interpretation. When you master the internal interpretation, you reclaim the power that most people give away without realizing it. A calm mind sees more. A disciplined mind decides better. A steady mind suffers less. This is the essence of becoming the stillness. Not escaping the storms, but becoming the force that no storm can move. And in this state, something even deeper becomes visible. The realization that destiny is not a matter of luck, chance, or external fate. It is the natural result of what you consistently choose to obey. Now the path leads to the final ascent, the understanding of destiny shaped in silence. Destiny shaped in silence, the life built by what you choose to obey. There is a moment, often unnoticed yet always decisive, when a person finally understands that destiny is not something they wait for. It is something they shape, not through miracles or sudden transformations, but through the quiet accumulation of choices made when no one is watching. This realization arrives not with drama, but with clarity, a clarity that emerges only after discipline has steadied the mind and stillness has softened the storms. The ancient Stoics insisted that fate is not a chain, but a path. What matters is not the external events that unfold, but the inner posture you bring to them. Cato the Younger taught that character determines one's relationship to fate, either as its victim or its partner. Modern neuroscience echoes this truth. The brain is not fixed, it is sculpted by repetition, attention, and belief. Every decision strengthens or weakens the neural circuits that define how you act under pressure, how you perceive difficulty, how you interpret your own life. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain records what you choose to obey. If you obey impulse, the brain wires impulsivity. If you obey fear, it wires caution into every future thought. If you obey discipline, it wires strength, resilience, and long-term thinking into your identity. The result is not just a habit, it is a destiny. This is why the anchor phrase holds its weight. What you control defines you. What controls you destroys you. Discipline is not about rigidity or punishment. It is about authorship. It is about seeing that every thought you follow becomes a thread in the fabric of your future. Every emotion you yield to becomes a vote for the kind of life you will live. Every moment of silence you cultivate becomes a foundation of clarity for the decades ahead. Jordan Peterson often speaks of meaning emerging from responsibility. The Stoics said the same in different words. When you govern your inner world with integrity, the outer world cannot break you. Destiny is forged in the quiet hours, in the decisions others call small, in the habits they call insignificant, in the standards they think are unnecessary. But these are the decisions that shape character, and character shapes fate. When you understand this, life stops feeling random. You stop waiting for motivation, confidence, or the perfect moment. You begin to act from a deeper truth, the understanding that every disciplined choice is a step toward the person you were meant to become, and every surrender to impulse is a step away from that possibility. You are not fighting for perfection. You are fighting for authorship, for the right to look at your life and know you chose it. This is destiny shaped in silence, destiny shaped by discipline, destiny shaped by the stillness you carry within. Now, we step into the final reflection, the closing moment where the lesson becomes a vow. Meditative final reflection, the choice that defines a life. In the end, everything returns to a single truth. Not a dramatic revelation or a sudden awakening, but a quiet understanding that settles in the mind like falling dust. Your life is shaped far less by the world around you than by the world within you. Every storm you have endured, every challenge you have faced, every moment when you stood at the edge of collapse or clarity was influenced not by chance, but by the posture of your inner empire. Discipline is not a punishment. It is a form of devotion. It is the daily choice to stand guard at the gates of your mind and decide what enters, what stays, and what shapes you. Emotion is not the enemy. It is a force that must be guided, trained, redirected toward higher purpose rather than allowed to rule through fear, impulse, or desire. What you obey becomes your reality. What you surrender to becomes your identity. There is a silence inside you, ancient, steady, and patient. A silence that does not beg for attention, but waits for recognition. When you enter that silence, you step into the space where destiny is formed, not by external power, but by internal order. Not by luck, but by intention. Not by what the world gives you, but by what you choose to give back. You are shaped by what you choose to rule. You are destroyed by what you allow to rule you. The Stoics lived by this law. Neuroscience confirms it, and every experience you have ever lived proves it true. Your destiny is not waiting somewhere far ahead. It is being carved in this moment, in this breath, in this decision. You stand now at the threshold between who you have been and who you could become, and the choice is not complicated. It is quiet, steady, and profound. Choose the discipline that strengthens you. Choose the stillness that protects you. Choose the path that honors the person you are capable of becoming. Finally, remember this. Your destiny is not out there. It is here, unfolding in the space between stimulus and response, impulse and intention, emotion and mastery. The quiet empire is yours to rule.